Curtis Windom, now 59, has spent over 3 decades on Florida's death row at Raiford Prison, facing execution on August 28, 2025. His life hangs in the balance, just weeks away. But to understand how he ended up here, we must rewind to the beginning, where a troubled childhood set the stage for a tragic path. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more gripping crime stories. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? What's running through your mind as this case unfolds? Your thoughts matter. Curtis Windom was born in 1966 in Winter Garden, a small city in Orange County, Florida, known for its citrus groves and tight-knit community. Little is publicly documented about his parents or their circumstances, but what we do know paints a picture of struggle. Curtis grew up in an environment where stability was scarce, and his family faced significant challenges. Court records and advocacy reports suggest his household was marked by dysfunction, though specific details about his parents' occupations or family dynamics remain limited. What is clear is that Curtis's early years were shaped by adversity, including poverty and a lack of consistent support, which left deep marks on his development. As a child, Curtis showed signs of developmental issues that set him apart. He struggled with speech and learning disorders, which made school a battleground. These challenges weren't just academic, they isolated him socially, making it hard to connect with peers or teachers. By his teenage years, he had dropped out of school, never completing his education. This wasn't just a lack of interest, it was a symptom of a system that failed to address his needs, leaving him to navigate a world that felt stacked against him. Without a diploma or guidance, Curtis was adrift, his frustrations mounting. The streets of Winter Garden became his classroom, but they taught harsh lessons. As a teenager, Curtis began experimenting with drugs, a habit that quickly spiraled into addiction. This wasn't just recreational, it was a coping mechanism for a young man grappling with feelings of inadequacy and anger. His drug use led to run-ins with the law, though records don't specify early arrests for major crimes. These petty encounters, however, were warning signs, like cracks in a foundation ready to collapse. How does a kid with learning struggles and no support system avoid a downward spiral? For Curtis, the answer was he didn't. His family ties, already fragile, offered little anchor. Curtis had a daughter, but his relationship with her mother, Valerie Davis, was turbulent. Described as on again, off again, court documents hint at a life marked by personal conflicts, with Curtis feeling betrayed or wronged by those around him, including friends like Johnnie Lee, whom he later claimed owed him money. These fractured relationships, combined with his untreated addiction and lack of education, built a man whose emotions could erupt unpredictably. What pushed him from petty troubles to a violent breaking point? That's the question that lingers as we trace his path from a struggling kid to a man facing the ultimate penalty. Curtis's story isn't just about one person's choices. It's about a cascade of failures, a school system that couldn't reach him, a community unable to curb his addiction, and a family too broken to guide him. By his 20s, he was no longer the kid fighting to be understood. He was a man carrying a volatile mix of resentment and desperation. The stage was set for the events of February 7, 1992, when a single day would change everything, not just for Curtis but for the families of 3 victims whose lives he would take. On February 7, 1992, in Winter Garden, Florida, 3 lives were tragically ended, and one was forever altered in a violent spree by Curtis Windom. The victims, Johnnie Lee, Valerie Davis, Mary Lubin, and survivor Kenneth Williams, were more than names in a court document. They were people with dreams, struggles, and connections to their community. To understand the weight of their loss, we need to know who they were, what made them human, and how their paths crossed with Windom's. Johnnie Lee, just 23 years old, was a young man full of energy, navigating life in Winter Garden's close-knit community. While detailed personal accounts of Johnny's life are scarce, court records describe him as a friend of Windom, someone who moved in the same social circles. He was known for enjoying life's small thrills, like betting at the dog track, where he'd recently won $114, a modest sum that unknowingly sparked a fatal chain of events. Johnny was likely a typical young man of his time, chasing dreams in a working-class town, perhaps hoping for a better future. Friends like Jack Luckett spoke of him casually, suggesting he was sociable, someone who'd stand on a sidewalk chatting with others, unaware of the danger approaching. His connection to Windom was rooted in familiarity but soured by conflict. Court testimony reveals Windom believed Johnny owed him $2,000, a debt that fueled his anger. Whether this debt was real or perceived, it became a trigger. On the morning of February 7, Windom asked Jack Luckett if Johnny had won money at the track. When he learned of the $114, Windom's resentment boiled over, and he declared, "You're gonna read about me vowing to kill Johnnie." Valerie Davis, 27, was a woman whose life was deeply intertwined with Windom's, making her loss all the more heart-wrenching. She was the mother of one of Windom's children, a daughter who became a link between them. Described in court documents as Windom's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Valerie lived in an apartment in Winter Garden, where she was raising her child and trying to carve out a stable life. Though little is documented about her personality or aspirations, we can imagine her as a young mother, juggling the demands of parenthood and a turbulent relationship. She was likely resilient, someone who faced life's challenges head-on, hoping for better days for herself and her daughter. Valerie's relationship with Windom was complex, marked by periods of closeness and conflict. They shared a home at times, suggesting moments of connection, but their bond was unstable, eventually making her a target. Mary Lubin, 41, was Valerie's mother, a woman who carried the weight of a parent's love and responsibility. While specific details about her life are limited, court records paint her as a working woman, likely dedicated to supporting her family. She was driving home from work on February 7, possibly after hearing the devastating news of her daughter's shooting. Mary was a pillar in her family, connected to her daughter and grandchildren, including Valerie's daughter, whom she shared with Windom. Her life was rooted in Winter Garden, where she was part of the same community as the other victims, a place where everyone knew each other. Mary's connection to Windom was through her daughter, Valerie. As the mother of Windom's child, she was entangled in his orbit, though there's no evidence of direct conflict between them before that day. Kenneth Williams, whose age isn't specified in records, was the sole survivor of Windom's violent spree. Little is known about his background, but he was a man going about his day in Winter Garden, likely a resident of the same community. Court documents don't detail his dreams or personality, but his survival offers a glimpse into his resilience. Kenneth was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, standing on the street when Windom, fleeing Valerie's apartment, crossed his path. There's no indication Kenneth and Windom had a prior relationship. His encounter was a cruel twist of fate. On February 7, 1992, in the small, quiet town of Winter Garden, Florida, a sunny morning turned tragic as Curtis Windom, then 26, unleashed a violent spree that left these 3 people dead and 1 gravely wounded. The events unfolded over mere minutes, but their impact shattered families and a community. At 11:51 a.m., Windom walked into a Walmart in nearby Oki, calm and composed, as described by the sales clerk Abner Yancey. He purchased a .38 caliber revolver and a box of 50. Within minutes, he was armed and ready to act on his rage. His first target was Johnnie Lee, 23, who was standing on a sidewalk in Winter Garden, chatting with Luckett and 2 women. Windom pulled up in his car, leaned across the passenger seat, and fired 2 shots into Johnnie's back. As Johnnie collapsed, Windom stepped out, stood over him, and fired 2 more shots at close range, ending his life. The witnesses froze in shock, their morning conversation now a nightmare. Windom didn't stop. He fled the scene, running toward an apartment nearby where Valerie Davis lived. Valerie was inside talking on the phone, unaware of the chaos unfolding. Windom burst in, and without hesitation, shot her once in the chest. She died instantly, her friend Cassandra Hall witnessing the horror. Why would Windom turn on someone so close to him? Court records suggest a mix of rage from their rocky relationship and a prior drug-related arrest they shared, which had deepened his sense of betrayal. As Windom fled the apartment, he encountered Kenneth Williams, a man with no known connection to him, on the street. In a moment of apparent frenzy, Windom shot Kenneth in the chest at close range. Kenneth later testified that Windom's eyes were bugged out like he had clicked, suggesting a man unhinged. Miraculously, Kenneth survived, though he spent nearly a month in the hospital. Windom's rampage wasn't over. He ran toward Brown's bar where his brother and 2 others tried to disarm him, a desperate attempt to stop the violence. At the same time, Mary Lubin, 41, Valerie's mother, was driving home from work, likely having heard her daughter had been shot. As she paused at a stop sign, Windom approached her car. He said something, court records don't specify what, then fired 2 shots, killing her. The loss of a mother rushing to her daughter's side added a heartbreaking layer to the tragedy. What could Windom have said in that fleeting moment? The answer remains locked in that deadly encounter. Windom's motives were a tangled web of personal grudges and emotional turmoil. Court records point to his belief that Johnnie Lee owed him money as the spark for the first murder. His rage toward Valerie stemmed from their strained relationship, compounded by a recent drug-related arrest they shared. Mary's death, while less clear, seems tied to her disapproval of Windom's relationship with her daughter, though some accounts suggest it was a chaotic act in his panicked flight. Kenneth's shooting appears random, a byproduct of Windom's unraveling state. The common thread was a man whose anger, fueled by drugs, debt, and broken relationships, erupted in a catastrophic chain of violence. The Winter Garden police acted swiftly as the community reeled from the shootings. Witnesses were key from the start. Jack Luckett and the two women on the sidewalk provided detailed accounts of Johnnie Lee's shooting, identifying Windom as the gunman. Cassandra Hall, who saw Valerie's murder, gave a first-hand description of Windom's actions in the apartment. Kenneth Williams, despite his injuries, later testified about his encounter, his vivid description of Windom's frenzied state, adding weight to the case. The sales clerk at Walmart, Abner Yancey, confirmed Windom's calm purchase of the .38 caliber revolver just minutes before the first shooting, with the sales slip time-stamped at 11:51 a.m., providing a critical timeline. Physical evidence tightened the net. The .38 caliber revolver, recovered after Windom's brother and others tried to disarm him at Brown's bar, matched the bullets used in the shootings. Ballistic analysis confirmed it was the murder weapon. Windom's car, seen at the scene of Johnny's shooting, further tied him to the crime. The small size of Winter Garden's community meant multiple witnesses recognized Windom, making evasion difficult. Federal investigators also noted Windom's involvement in a local crack cocaine ring, which provided context for his drug-fueled behavior and prior arrest with Valerie, though this wasn't central to the murder case. Windom's arrest came quickly, though exact details of the moment are sparse in public records. Court documents indicate he was apprehended the same day, likely after fleeing to Brown's bar, where his brother's attempt to disarm him signaled his location to authority. There's no record of Windom confessing, nor did he attempt to flee far. Winter Garden's tight-knit nature left few places to hide. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Johnnie Lee, Valerie Davis, and Mary Lubin, and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder for shooting Kenneth Williams. The trial, held in August 1992 in Orange County's Ninth Circuit Court, was swift and decisive. Prosecutors led by Jeff Ashton presented a compelling case built on witness testimony, ballistic evidence, and Windom's own statements to Luckett about killing Johnny. The defense, led by attorney William Leinster, called witnesses to highlight Windom's character, including his sister Gerline, who testified he saved her from drowning as a child, and Julie Harp, who said he was a good father to their 2 children. A psychiatrist suggested Windom might have been mentally disturbed, but Judge Dorothy Russell dismissed this as far-fetched. Windom apologized to the victims' families before sentencing, saying, "I'm hurting too," but offered no full confession. The jury convicted Windom on all 4 counts, unanimously recommending death for the murder. On November 10, 1992, Judge Russell sentenced him to death for each murder, citing 2 aggravating factors: Windom's prior conviction of a violent felony, each murder counted as a prior for the others, and the cold, calculated, premeditated nature of Johnnie Lee's killing. She also noted mitigating factors, like Windom's troubled upbringing and learning disorders, but found they didn't outweigh the crime's severity. A 22-year sentence for Kenneth's attempted murder was added consecutively. For over 33 years, Curtis Windom, now 59, has lived in the shadow of his death sentence at Florida's Raiford Prison, home to the state's death row. Convicted in 1992 for the murders of Johnnie Lee, Valerie Davis, and Mary Lubin, and the attempted murder of Kenneth Williams, Windom has spent more than half his life in one of America's most restrictive prison environments. His days are shaped by routine, isolation, and the looming weight of his scheduled execution on August 20. Death row at Raiford Prison, part of Union Correctional Institution, is a stark, controlled world. Inmates like Windom live in single cells, roughly 6 by 9 feet, with a bunk, a sink, and a toilet. The environment is designed for security, not comfort. Concrete walls, steel doors, and barred windows offering little view of the outside world. Windom's days follow a rigid schedule: wake up at 5 a.m., meals delivered through a slot in the door, and limited recreation time in a caged yard. Inmates can have books, a radio, or writing materials, but access to activities is tightly regulated. Showers are allowed a few times a week, and contact with others is minimal, creating a life of solitude punctuated by the sounds of clanging doors and distant voices. Little is documented about Windom's specific behavior in prison, but court records and advocacy reports provide some insight. In a 2010 letter cited by the community of Sant'Egidio, Windom expressed fear that he had exhausted his legal appeals, showing awareness of his precarious situation. He wrote again on July 18, 2025, describing anguish and fear as Florida's execution pace intensified, with 2 inmates put to death each month. These letters suggest a man grappling with the reality of his sentence, though they don't explicitly mention remorse. Whether Windom feels regret for the lives he took, Johnnie, Valerie and Mary, remains unclear in public records. Has he privately wrestled with guilt, or does he cling to justifications from that fateful day in that? The answer lies locked within him. Windom's interactions with guards and inmates are not well documented, but death row's environment shapes such relationships. Guards maintain strict control, often limiting personal exchanges to avoid emotional attachment. Inmates, isolated in their cells, may shout to communicate or pass notes, forming distant bonds. Advocacy reports suggest Windom has corresponded with supporters, like the community of Sant'Egidio, indicating some connection to the outside world. Whether he's built alliances or conflicts with others on death row is unknown, but the isolation likely weighs heavily, amplifying the tension of his long wait. Windom has pursued extensive legal appeals, a common path for death row inmates. Since his 1992 conviction, he filed multiple motions in state and federal courts, including a 2004 habeas corpus petition, raising 14 claims in a 2007 challenge to Florida's lethal injection protocols. All were denied, with courts upholding his convictions and sentence. A 2010 legal effort highlighted his mental disability, speech and learning disorders noted in childhood, which briefly delayed an execution date, as it was argued to be incompatible with capital punishment. However, this protection didn't hold, and Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant on July 20. Windom's persistence in appeals shows a fight to survive, but has he found peace or purpose in his decades behind bars? There's no clear evidence Windom turned to religion, though many death row inmates do, seeking solace in faith as their execution nears. He may have access to a prison chaplain or spiritual advisors, as is standard in Florida, but no records confirm his engagement. His letters focus more on fear than redemption, suggesting a man preoccupied with survival over spiritual transformation. How does someone face decades knowing death awaits? For Windom, it's been a life of waiting, writing, and watching time slip away. As August 28, 2025, approaches, Windom is likely on death watch, a phase where inmates facing execution or move to a special cell near the execution chamber at Florida State Prison in Stark. This cell, slightly larger than his regular one, allows closer monitoring by guards. The days leading up to the execution are tightly scripted, governed by Florida's death row protocols. Windom's routine will include final preparations, meetings with lawyers to discuss last-minute appeals, visits from family or spiritual advisors, and decisions about his last meal. What will he choose to say or do in these final moments? Florida's Department of Corrections allows inmates to request a last meal typically limited to $40. He may select something tied to his past, perhaps a dish from his winter garden childhood, or opt for something simple, reflecting the weight of the moment. He'll eat this meal hours before the execution, likely alone, as he contemplates the end. Windom's final days will involve visits, if he chooses them. He has a daughter from his relationship with Valerie Davis, and other family members like his sister Gerline, who testified for him at trial. Whether they'll visit depends on their relationship, strained by his crimes and decades apart. Spiritual advisors, such as a chaplain or a representative from groups like Sant'Egidio, may offer support, especially given their public appeal for clemency. Windom's letters suggest he's anxious, possibly leaning on these interactions for comfort. Will he open up about his crimes or seek forgiveness in these final hours? The execution, if it proceeds, will use Florida's 3-drug lethal injection protocol: etomidate to sedate, rocuronium bromide to paralyze, and potassium acetate to stop the heart. On August 28 at 6 a.m., Windom will be led to the execution chamber strapped to a gurney and connected to IV lines. Witnesses, including victims' families, media, and officials, will watch from behind a glass partition. The process is clinical. After final statements, the drugs are administered, and death typically occurs within minutes. Windom's eyes may close, his breathing slow, and then stop, as the room remains silent. Florida has executed 9 inmates in 2025, with Windom set to be the 11th, breaking modern records. But could a last-minute appeal or clemency change his fate?
Windom's life on death row has been a long, solitary march toward August. His days of routine, reading, writing, and waiting carry the weight of his crimes and the lives he took. The victims' families, who have waited 33 years, may find closure or continued pain in his execution. Windom's fear, evident in his letters, humanizes him without erasing the harm he caused. As the clock ticks down, the question remains, will he face his fate with remorse, defiance, or silence? The execution chamber awaits, but until that moment, hope and dread hang in the balance. What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.